it doesn't cost more than it should cost because we're still paying teachers too little. And we're still not offering benefits, and we're not offering health care or retirement benefits. But it costs more than most families can afford to pay.
To another episode of Parenting Understood. Today we are thrilled to have Dr. Dale Farran join us to talk about her work examining the impacts of pre-K attendance on children's development. So thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm delighted. I'm so glad you're interested.
Well, I think a lot of folks are interested, not just me. So thank you for being here. So I think, there's been so much publicity and press around the findings from your and your colleagues' work looking at children who attended a public pre-K in Tennessee. And I definitely want to talk a lot about that. But before we talk about that, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the study design and how this whole study came about.
I'm delighted to do this because it's really important that people understand at present, there is no other what we call randomized control study of statewide pre-K. This is the only one. And it would only work if we worked in partnership with the Tennessee Department of Education, which we did for 2 years in 2007 and 2008, designing and then finding funding for the study. Because working with them, they helped us work with school systems that were oversubscribed. So there were more parents who had children they wanted to be in pre-K than there was room for them. And we used what would be the equivalent of a lottery draw. And people understand that. You win the lottery, or you don't. So some kids got in by a lottery and got a place, got a seat in the classroom, and some kids did not. And those children who did not then were our comparison group. And in Tennessee, it's a statewide, has many rural areas. So this is a statewide study. Children came from all over, and the children who did not get into pre-K, 63% of them were cared for either by their parents or relatives. So you would think of it as home care, but it might be auntie down the street. Another 23% of them were either in Head Start or a more community-based childcare program. So we have followed these children from the beginning of pre-K, and when at the end of pre-K, everybody was very excited because the children who'd been in pre-K had more school readiness skills than the children who had not. And their kindergarten teachers in the fall saw them as better prepared for kindergarten, which everybody thought we were terrific because this is the most rigorous study yet done. And look, we're showing these positive effects at the end of pre-K. Unfortunately, we kept following them. And now we have followed them through third grade, we presented those results, and now through sixth grade. At third grade, there were some troublesome trends began to emerge, which then became solid at sixth grade. First, achievement. The children who had attended pre-K, who had looked better at entering kindergarten, scored lower on all 3 state achievement tests, lower in reading, math, and science than the children who had not attended pre-K. More troubling to me was that the children who had attended pre-K were more likely to be suspended and expelled than the children who had not attended, which suggested there were some social, emotional outcomes that were as negative as the achievement outcomes. I know this is not happy news for people, but our study was designed to rigorously investigate the effects of a statewide program, and there are no other studies that do that. I'd be happy to have some other studies that do that. I'd be happy for other states to do it, and they could do it because pre-K is not universal right now. And so other states could also look at oversubscribed programs and do a lottery draw. And all they have to do is make sure at the beginning of that process, they give every child who applies a state education ID number. so they can track them, those who got in and attended pre-K and those who didn't. But they
It
haven't
seems
done
like
that
a
yet.
relatively simple way to
Right.
really tease this apart, right?
Yep.
Do you have any theories as to why that's not being done?
I think, I'm not sure why this, it's a complicated answer. There's several answers to that. I think it's not being done because people have been sold the story that pre-K is effective. That's the first thing. And pre-K advocates sell that story. And they use data from very poorly designed studies, which you can really not draw what we call causal inference. You can't draw cause and effect conclusion from the way those studies have been done. Or they use studies that were really well designed, but happened in the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah.
And that's 60 years ago, 50, 70 years ago.
Lots changed.
And they were tiny studies, very small, 125 kids, children in them. And yes, they did follow them long term. I was actually involved in one of those studies because I'm old. So I was involved in one of those studies. And yes, but they were so different. It's really hard to generalize from those very early studies. And we haven't had really good data on what are the current programs of today. So people have been sold this. The other thing is, I think people are searching for a silver bullet.
Yeah.
We have an achievement gap. There's no question that we have an achievement gap from children who come from higher income and lower income families. We do. Is that going to be fixed by 9 months of pre-K? It
That's
doesn't.
a lot of pre-K.
That's a huge burden to put on a pre-K program, when really we should be fixing more of I think, the K through third grade experiences that children have, especially in high poverty schools.
Yeah. No, I think that makes total sense. And sort of in thinking about too, the results, and I know it's made some folks really anxious. It's created a lot of buzz out there, for lack of a better term. Can you sort of help put those findings in context for folks too, please?
So in addition to doing this work, a large part of the research I do involves being in classrooms and taking observations of what goes on there in literally hundreds of classrooms. Now, I myself have not personally been in hundreds, but I've been in dozens, 50, 100. What I see going on in classrooms, particularly that focus on children from low-income families, is inappropriate instruction. It's a focus on basic skills. It is a focus on pedagogy, or the practice of teaching, that involves a lot of large group instruction. We can see 4-year-olds having to sit in large group for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. In one classroom I was in, they sat in large group for 89 minutes.
Wow.
The amount of control that the teacher has to exercise over 4-year-olds to make them sit, crisscross applesauce, don't touch your neighbor, pay attention, look up here, Johnny, all that sort of behavioral control. The longer the whole group goes on, the more behavioral control is required. And so children are not developing internal control. They're developing compliance, if anything, to a lot of external control in those classrooms. Second, a lot of them are in public schools, public elementary schools. All of the 93% of the Tennessee classrooms were in public elementary schools.
Wow.
A lot of these schools are not equipped to handle 4-year-olds. Many of them not even equipped to handle kindergarten children well. And so there's no bathroom adjacent to the classroom. Meals are not served in the classroom, which means a phenomenal amount of transition, where children have to go into the hallway, march down to the bathroom, and then wait while while 2 or 3 of them individually go into the bathroom at a time. They have to make their way into the cafeteria, barely able to see over, where they're holding their trays, with often not very nice lunch ladies, and trying to remember what they had said they ordered for in the 2 hours before in the morning when they got there. And it all of that transition, actually, we have data that shows it triples the amount of negative control teachers exert. The more transitions you're in, the more control, because you're walking down the hallway as a 4-year-old and you're not supposed to disturb the 4th graders, right? So you have to keep very quiet and not touch the wall, and not skip or hop and not touch your neighbor. And so it takes all the joy out of those classrooms.
Wow, that's remarkable. I mean, I hadn't really thought too about even just like, quote unquote, the little things of going to the lunchroom, and it's not sized
Exactly.
for that.
That's right.
Like all these things you almost take for granted in a way, that you're thinking like it's going to be prepared for children so that they can actually just reach how to get to their lunch. And that's not necessarily there for them. Just sort of thinking about that really kind of puts it all in perspective in a way of course, it might not all be positive.
There's so many things happening to parents these days, but one of them is really good, high quality childcare costs way too much.
So much.
It doesn't cost more than it should cost, because we're still paying teachers too little, and we're still not offering benefits, and we're not offering health care or retirement benefits. But it costs more than most families can afford to pay, because we don't have any support in this country, as they do in all other developed countries. We don't have any support for families during this critical time of their children's lives, 0 to 5, when they're desperately searching for ways to find stable care that's of high quality. So it will lead parents to think, well, maybe I should use a pre-K program for at least part of the day. If the state's willing to pay for it, then all I have to cover is before and after, which is a lot of transitions for children, but we'll cover that later. But anyway, so I understand that. So if you're going to do that, and higher income families will have more choice about this than lower income families, you need to look for a room where you sense joy. You sense that the teacher is actually going to create interesting activities for children to explore, ways for your child to learn to be persistent, ways to encourage your child to be curious, ways to encourage your child to want to learn more about something. And you want to make sure there's some sense from the teacher that the teacher really is interested in your child individually, not as a whole group, not just as a whole group. And I think there are in New York City, for example, I think there are programs where the classroom actually has its own little courtyard and playground, where the children do have lunch in their room, where there is an adjoining bathroom. Those are the kinds of things you really want to key in on if you're a parent in making that choice.
So, I think I have a sense of how you're going to respond to this, but how do you hope your work will inform, especially right now when, these findings have just come out, sort of inform policy around early care and education in this country?
Well, if I had you mean if the world were mine and I could run it?
The world were yours.
Good. Okay. There's a lot of federal money in different kinds of programs, and it's all chock-a-block right now. With different requirements for the way they're being used and so forth. If there were a way to pull those things together and actually provide support for a child care system in this country, if I really could run the world, I would also include paid parental leave, for not just 6 weeks. In Sweden, it's 12 to 18 months at 60% salary. And it can be switched between father and mother. If I had my way, I would provide that sort of support for families when their babies are infants, because infant care is atrocious and so difficult.
It is.
I mean, I'm not suggesting that mothers and fathers have to stay home. Many parents would like to stay home if their jobs were secure and they could get payment for at least, a half of their child's life, or 3 months or 6 months of the first year of life. And so I would build that in. I would then, and I think that got left out of the Build Back Better bill, which was
Yeah.
just distressing. And then I would actually try to support nonprofit childcare by providing a substantial cushion of salary cushion, so that some of that salaries for childcare workers were coming from state and federal sources, and some were coming, from parents, and then there would be a system where these programs would be connected and be able to provide health benefits and retirement benefits so that we could stabilize the workforce.
Yes. The turnover too is
Outrageous.
yeah. Yeah, it really is.
Because the salaries are way too low.
Yeah.
And because there are no benefits. So
You can't provide for your own family, let alone,
Right. I would not go toward having more programs like these fractured sort of pre-K in the public schools programs that are disconnected. In fact, what's happening by putting public money into a pre-K and making it another grade in school is it's pulling money out of community childcare. And your 4-year-olds are vitally important because you can charge a little more for your 4-year-olds and not have to charge the full cost of care for your infants and toddlers.
Yes.
And when you pull those fours out, it's closing down programs. And we cannot afford to lose any infant and toddler care.
I think that's such an important point, and one that sometimes gets left out of the conversation, I feel like.
Right. So, I mean, I will tell you that I didn't always hold these views. I've been an early childhood developmental psychologist for a long time. And in fact, I did my dissertation in a elementary school that was in Philadelphia, and it was a multi-age classroom, 4 to 6. So this was the second pressure I was going to talk about on parents. I think there's been a sea change in the last 20 years in terms of what we believe is important for young children to know when they're early on. When I started out, we used to say to teachers, children are going to read sometime between the ages of 4 and like 10. And long term, it doesn't really matter whether they learn to read at 8 or they've learned to read at 4. Yeah. We always said that because, in fact, the data support that. There isn't any long-term difference in terms of whether you were an early reader or a later reader, as long as you learned to read before the end of 2nd grade. 20 years ago, when kindergarten teachers were surveyed, they said they didn't think academic instruction was important before kids got into kindergarten. They really wanted children who had learned to get along with other children and who were confident and who could abide by the rules of the kindergarten. Now, in the latest survey, 86% of kindergarten teachers say children should have learned to read before they leave kindergarten.
Wow.
That's a crazy change.
Crazy change.
I can't tell where this pressure is coming from. I have a colleague whose child is getting ready to go into kindergarten. She received a kindergarten book, information booklet. In it were questions. How many letters and sounds does your child know?
Wow.
Can your child read? Which 3 books does your child read independently?
Wow.
I was dumbfounded. Where is this pressure coming from? Parents must be crazy with this pressure because it's so inappropriate. Your child might be one of those 10% of children who is highly interested in language and reading and letters and sounds and whatever when he or she is 4. But that's a small percentage of children who are who are just sort of geared that way. And if we try to pressure all the others to move into areas they're not really ready for or interested in, we're going to have, as we saw with our data, we're going to have negative long-term results. Children are going to get allergic to school.
Yes. Yes. Without a doubt. Just burned out and find no joy in it. Yeah.
Exactly.
So a question that we always like to ask, Michelle and I always like to ask, we're together. She couldn't be here today, unfortunately, is so we always talk about how being in the field of psychology and also being moms, how our careers have influenced our roles as, how we see our roles as parents and vice versa. So a question we always love to ask our guests is, how has that been the case for you with your, you have this really, successful, illustrious career as a researcher in development and also being a parent, and I hear a grandparent.
A grandparent.
How do you feel, sort of each has influenced the other?
Interestingly, my own mother thought I was very boring because from the time I was in high school, I knew what I was interested in, which was young children and children's thinking and their development. And I will tell you, I'm very, very lucky. In my career, I have never been bored.
That's
And the
great.
worst thing that I could wish on somebody is to be bored. It has never ceased to interest me. Uh, there's so much to know, and I haven't by any means learned it all. There's so much. But so I can apply that to lots of children. And I love being in classrooms. I love watching children. I love watching how they're processing things and what sense they're making of things. And it's so idiosyncratic. It's so odd. I have to be really, really careful with my grandchildren because my children do not ask for my advice. and my tongue swells from not giving it.
I can imagine.
So it's really interesting how immersed I am in this and how much I feel I can't really apply it to my own children or my own grandchildren because I'm almost like a detached observer of other children and making sense of them. And with my own children as they were growing up, and I was a part of their process, and it was really hard. It's always been hard for me with my two children to figure out how much a part of their own growing up and developing was the interactions with me that I don't think I can see children. I can't necessarily see myself.
Totally. Yes.
And for my grandchildren, I think I do see them in a more detached way, but I really can't say anything about it. Not at all. But I love them. They're delightful. They're totally delightful. And I love being around them. And it's a completely different perspective than I had as a parent. So I can't wait until you're a grandparent. It's very different.
I could see that. I could even see as the child with children when like my dad starts to maybe offer some advice or critique, I'm like, no.
Well, isn't it interesting? And parenting is one of the most personal, vulnerable things we do.
Yes.
And and I don't know. I mean, we'd have to look back, and I think 75 or even 100 years ago, or maybe even 50 years ago, parents did not feel quite so personally responsible for all their children's outcomes. I think children kind of grew themselves up in bigger families, and I think there was more of a perspective of sort of how they turned out is how they turned out. Could be God's will or just fate or whatever, but not such a personal reflection on you as an individual, as the parent, how your children turn out. And I think now it is way too impersonal that way. And I think parents, I feel for parents because there's so much we can't control with the social media and mean, I don't know, you have a 13-year-old. I'm not sure I would want to raise a teenager today. I mean, it just, there's so much you can't do anything about, you know. So we're getting off track, but I mean, I think we, I think that's, I think it's part of this pressure to do a lot of academic and, well, basic skills sort of instruction before your child goes to school, so that he or she is, you know, welcomed by the kindergarten teacher as having all these skills and you know, being top of the class. Um, it was interesting. Years ago, we had good friends who were from Australia, and they had a child my daughter's age, so my firstborn. They were both about maybe three, and we were all about showing off what my daughter knew. Point to your elbow, point to your eyes. Do you know where your chin is? You know, all those things that sort of, and they were all about, well, would the queen like the way you're eating at the table? It was so, I was so struck by how different the emphasis was in our two families.
Yeah. Well,
But Americans are very individualistic. See, I mean,
yeah.
we put a lot of pressure on children to be better, even at 4, to be better than the next child, to know more, to read sooner, you know, to know more letters, to know more numbers, to show off, if you will. I do a lot of work in Sweden. Sweden doesn't start formal instruction until children are 6.
Wow.
And there's a nationwide perspective about what it is young children need. And one of the things that they need, 95% of 2-year-olds in Sweden are in care. So group care, one of the things they need is to learn how to get along, how to participate, how to be part of a group in a positive way.
Nice.
I mean, it's not the only thing they focus on, but it is a critical thing they focus on before formal education starts. They figure that children need to be socialized, to be with each other in a supportive way,
Yeah.
before they start doing, you know, reading and writing and arithmetic, if you will. And we have a very different perspective in this country.
Yes. And it's that, I mean, I've even noticed that, having gone through this now 10 years apart with a 13-year-old and a 2-year-old. I think there's so much pressure on parents to also feel, they feel like they're in the spotlight all the time, right? Like their parenting
Right.
is. So it's like hard to even, I feel like sometimes forming that community of parents with, you know, same age children isn't as easy, because everyone almost feels like they're being potentially like judged by their peers, and it's taking
Because they
away a lot.
are.
They are, exactly. It takes away
I
so
think
much.
it's, no, I mean, what a shame of it. You know, this is a time, it's a time when when children are, you know, before 5, before 6, always, but especially in those times, it's a time when parents need a lot of support from other families.
Yes.
They need a lot of people saying, I know what you're going through. Oh my Lord, you didn't get any sleep, you know, and suddenly this child who was perfect is tantruming and you don't know what to do about it, you know? I mean, parents need support of other families, of other parents. I mean, yes, it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to support you so that, you know, you feel confident about your doing, and you realize that most things are going to pass and they're going to be okay and you're going to be okay. But it really helps to have other adults around telling you that.
Oh, without a doubt. That social support is just vital. And I would say also with a teenager.
Yes, yes, yes. I remember, my son will kill me if he won't hear this, but you know, when he was 16, I think he came in, I was doing something, he came in and he slammed his hand down on the table and he said, Mom, this was like November, I am going on spring break to Myrtle Beach, North Carolina. And I said, well, first of all, Myrtle Beach is not in North Carolina. He said, that's not the point. So, okay. But my first thought was, what are other families doing? What are other parents doing? You know,
Yes.
I need to call people. I need to talk about this. I can't answer this without talking to people.
Totally. Yes. That's a great example. And I hope at 16 we're not going through that, but my guess is we will. Well, listen, I could talk to you forever, Dale, but I'm cognizant of time, and I'm sure folks will also want to, see other work you've done. And is there like a website, or where can we send folks to hear more about your work?
That is, thank you. Thank you very much. I've actually, I did a piece which I can even send to you for defending the early years, on this idea about what are the sort of deeper skills we want to help children develop that may lead then to better academic skills. But just focusing on the academic skills is not going to lead to the development of the deeper skills. So, but my website is my curriculum vitae with all my references and stuff like that is at my Vanderbilt website. So if they just Google me at Vanderbilt, then they can find that. But also, if they just Google me, I think that a lot of the stuff is going to come up that of things I've written, especially recently.
Oh, that's great. And in our show notes, we can also put, references to all those different things so folks can find them easily.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much. I don't want
to. It was a real pleasure. I mean, I probably did drift a little afield, but it was fun.
Oh, it was very fun.